the Hometime Project House. I'm Dean Johnson.
And I'm Peggy Knapp. In the video you're about to see, Dean and I will be showing you the step-by-step process for a number of painting and wall covering applications.
To do this effectively, we'll be splitting the tape into two parts. The first part will focus on painting and stenciling, and the second part will deal with wall coverings.
Hometime is made possible by Chevrolet, who brings you full-size Chevy pickups, the most advanced in Chevy history. Chevy S10 pickups, compact, fun, and hard-working. Chevy S10 Blazer, America's most popular sport utility vehicle. Chevy Astro, the van that can. The heartbeat of America. Today's Chevy truck.
This video is just one in a library of instructional programs designed to assist the viewer in working on a wide range of home improvement projects. And before we begin our program, I want to explain how you can best make use of this educational system. First off, you should watch the tape all the way through to get an idea of the methods, the steps, and the terminology we use. To help familiarize yourself with the terms, we've included a glossary in the project guide. Then you should review the tape again, only this time, check with your project guide to determine the tools and materials appropriate to your project. Then take the project guide to your local building supply dealer or home center. The people there will be able to assist you, answer questions, and direct you to what you need. The key to tackling home projects, whether structural or cosmetic, is to take your time, work step by step, completing one step before moving on to the next.
Bringing home all the things you need for a do-it-yourself job is easy with a new full-size Chevy pickup. Because Chevy started with a blank sheet of paper, and they redesigned these big pickups with your needs in mind. They look good, they're easy to maintain, but most importantly, they're full-size tough.
This long wheelbase model comes with an 8-foot cargo box. There's enough room to stack 4x8 sheets of building material flat on the floor with the tailgate closed. So don't let the aerodynamic styling fool you. This is a full-size pickup that does full-size jobs a smaller truck just can't do.
Inside there's full-size room and comfort too. The instrument panel is all new, and the whole interior is designed to help you do a hard day's work without feeling beat up.
For full-size power, there's a Vortec V6, the most powerful standard engine on 1/2 and 3/4 ton models. And depending on the model, you can get available V8s up to a mighty 454. Any gas engine you choose comes with electronic fuel injection to help you make fast starts.
Driving in the rain or snow is not my idea of fun, so I really appreciate the rear wheel anti-lock braking system. It's designed for straight stops, whether the pickup is empty or loaded. This anti-lock braking system is another reason why this is the most advanced full-size pickup in Chevy history.
Check out a new full-size Chevy pickup to see just how far pickup technology has come. You'll see why. Nothing works like a Chevy truck.
New interior walls, like this one, require 2 coats of paint. First a primer coat, and then a finish coat. Now, the primer coat seals the surface, it gives the wall a tooth for the finish coat, and it assures that the finish coat will dry evenly. Now, there's lots of kinds of primers available, from oil-based and latex to anti-rust for metal and masonry primers. Now, walls that have been water-stained or are marred with felt markers or crayons require an alcohol-based primer to seal the stain and to keep it from bleeding through the finish coat. Now, as for the finish coat, there are 2 basic types, oil-based and water-based. Oil-based or alkyd paint penetrates the surface and flows over the surface easier, leaving less of a brush or roller mark than water-based paint. However, it is slower drying, it's messy to clean up, and because of its fumes, it requires adequate ventilation. Now, water-based or latex paint is easy to apply and clean up, and it dries quickly. For interior walls, there are ideal rooms and applications for each type of paint, which we've indicated in your companion project guide. Now, as for the amount of paint you'll need, well, that depends on how much wall surface you're covering and the type of surface to be covered. The more porous the surface, the more paint will be absorbed. Most paint manufacturers include on their labels the amount of coverage per gallon of paint. Typically, coverage is around 400 square feet per gallon for high-quality paints. To estimate how many gallons you'll need to thoroughly cover your painting project, you need to first determine the square footage of surface to be covered and convert that number into gallons. To estimate the square footage of a wall, measure the height and the width and multiply those figures together. Now, the people at your paint store will be able to help you in making sure that your estimate is correct.
Now let's take a look at the tools we'll be using for our paint applications. First off, for prepping the walls, we'll need a putty knife, a sponge, a bucket. For painting, Peggy and I will be using brushes, rollers, a roller extension, roller paint trays, a masking tape dispenser, drop cloths, both plastic and canvas, and a step ladder. In terms of brush selection, there are many types on the market, from natural bristle to nylon polyester. But generally speaking, a natural bristle brush works best when used with oil-based paints, and a nylon polyester brush works best with latex paint. And since the brush is one of the main tools you'll be using, it's well worth a few extra dollars if it means a more effective job.
And we just want to remind you before we start that no matter how simple or extensive your job is, be safety conscious. If you're in a hurry, or if you think you can get by without taking the proper safety precautions, you're just asking for problems.
What we recommend is that you work at a comfortable pace, wear the proper clothing and protection, and follow the manufacturer's guidelines in using their tools, materials, and equipment. To ensure a good-looking paint job, thorough wall preparation is essential. It's unwise to expect the paint to cover any defects in the walls. The wall should be free of grease, cracking or peeling paint, holes, no matter how small, before the primer or final coat's applied. Now for plaster walls, the cracks will have to be filled with a patching compound and reinforced with fiberglass tape, then recoated with feathered layers of compound that's sanded to a smooth finish. Drywall doesn't crack like plaster, but it does leave holes, like this little accident here. With a plaster wall, you'll find a backing of lath under which you can fill the hole. With drywall, there's no backing between the studs, so patching it will require a different approach. There are two ways to do this. One way is to take a piece of cardboard, slightly larger than the hole, and tied to a length of string, insert it in the hole and pull taut. This creates a backing onto which you can apply patching compound. After the first coat of compound is dried, I can cut the string and go back and apply a second coat. With the second coat dry, you can apply some fiberglass tape to strengthen the patch. Cover with a layer of compound, feathering out around the hole with a wide-bladed knife. Let it dry and sand smooth. Then in our case, we'd install a doorstop to make sure this doesn't happen again. Another approach to use is called the hat patch method. The idea here is to insert a small piece of drywall the size of the hole with some paper backing to serve as the joint tape. The first step in this process is to clean the rough edges of the existing hole. Then I cut out the patch using a sharp utility knife, and on the back side came in an inch, scored the circumference, and scraped off the gypsum, being careful not to tear off the facing paper. The next step is to apply joint compound to the hole in the wall. Then insert the patch, making sure it fits, and coat the seam around the overlap with 2 coats of joint compound, feathering out the edges to assure a smooth finish.
With the walls prepped, we vacuumed the room to remove any dust or debris that could get kicked up and affect the paint job. Now, as for drop cloths, canvas is recommended over poly to protect floors. With poly, there's a tendency to track the paint all over the house, whereas canvas absorbs the paint. A poly is better used for protecting furnishings and appliances. But when purchasing canvas drop cloths, make sure they're at least 8 or 9 ounce canvas. Thinner canvas allows the paint to soak through.
It's also important to mask the woodwork for protection against paint drips and splatters, depending on the extent of the woodwork. Since these are new walls, we don't have to worry about washing them. But for old walls, it's a good idea to wash with trisodium phosphate to remove any accumulated grease and oil. And then follow with a rinse to provide a good bonding for the paint.
Now, regardless of whether you're going to paint or hang wallpaper on new drywall, a prime coat is essential. It not only seals the surface and provides a uniform undercoat for the paint, it also adds an extra layer of protection against heat, humidity, and stain. Now, as with paint, there are two basic types of primers: latex-based and oil-based. For drywall, a latex primer or polyvinyl sealer is recommended. And for getting maximum coverage of your finish coat, a good trick is to have the primer tinted the same color as the paint. But whatever your situation, it's important that you inquire at your paint supplier as to what type of primer works best with your finish paint.
Before we apply our finished coat of paint to the walls, we'll want to box the paint. Because the colors can vary from gallon can to gallon can, to keep the colors consistent, we're mixing them together into a 5-gallon bucket. It's also a good idea to note the number of the paint, which is indicated on the can, for future color matching. Another method you can use is to work out of your first gallon until you have about a quart remaining, and then pour paint from your second gallon into your original can and stir together, and keep on pouring from the second into the first until complete. Then just repeat this process.
A coat of paint can refresh a room quickly and easily, and how you go about painting a room can either make the task enjoyable or unpleasant. For this room, we're going to be using a brush and a roller. Starting at the top, we're painting a band of paint around the perimeter using a 3-inch natural bristle brush. This is called cutting in, and it gives us a clean edge for the roller to paint up to later. A good technique when painting with a brush is to dip the brush into the paint about half the length of the bristles, then give it a slap against both sides of the can, as opposed to the rim. This way the brush holds more paint and drips less. Hold the brush at an angle, and starting wide, apply the paint with the tips of the bristles, pushing the paint to where you want it, spreading the paint out evenly over the surface, making the last finish strokes all the same direction, overlapping the previous area to ensure a uniform appearance. Whether you're cutting in or rolling out large sections, it's important to maintain a wet edge to avoid any lap marks. Lap marks occur when your cutting edge dries before the rolling can overlap it. If you're working by yourself, then you'll want to paint the edge, then roll out a section at a time.
An effective roller application involves first loading the roller in the paint tray, running the roller cover over the grooves until the paint is evenly distributed. Roller covers come in a variety of nap thicknesses, from heavy for stuccoed surfaces, medium nap, and short nap for latex and oil paints. An effective rolling technique is to thoroughly cover the wall surface a section at a time. First, I start in the corner near the ceiling, applying the paint in the shape of a W. And without lifting the roller from the wall, fill in the areas between the legs of the W. And finish off the area with gentle strokes in a crescent pattern, using steady and even pressure, letting the roller do the work. Once the area has been thoroughly covered, move on to the next. Going back over it, once it has begun to set up, we'll lift the paint. In starting the next section, feather the edges together, lifting the roller at the end of each stroke to avoid an edge. A great way to accent the decor of the room is with a stenciled border. There are so many styles and patterns available, you're bound to find something to suit your interior, be it contemporary, traditional, or Victorian. For our stenciling project, we'll be creating a ceiling border in the children's room. During the process, we'll be showing you two applications, one using crayons and one using paint.
For proper bonding of the stencil, the wall surface should have a coat of flat latex-based or flat oil-based paint. A gloss or semi-gloss finish is too shiny for the stencil to stick to. And the same goes for stenciling on wallpaper. Where there's a metallic, a vinyl, or a glossy finish, there's much less likelihood of getting a good bond.
Before we stencil the wall itself, it's a good idea to make some practice stencils on some blank paper. We're using poster board about the same color as the room. This will give us a chance to make some color selections and to check the overall alignment of the pattern on the wall to see if the motif fits in with the decor of the room. Now, in using the paint approach, I first dip the brush in the paint and then blot it on the paper towels before applying the paint to the stencil. You can choose either a solid or a translucent look. I want the brush fairly dry to give it more of a translucent look as opposed to a painted look. When working with crayons or paint, you can achieve a three-dimensional look by leaving a lighter center in the design.
When stenciling a centered border around a room, you'll need to determine the starting corner. To begin the stenciling, apply the stencil to the wall with drafting tape, positioning the center 5½ inches from the ceiling. You want to be careful not to use a tape like masking tape that's so sticky it can pull paint off the wall. Since this pattern is a centered border, we want to measure the full length of the wall, then divide that by the width of the stencil. The remainder of that calculation is then divided by 2. This is the distance that we start from the corner with the first stencil. To start with, apply the crayon to the surface of the stencil. That's the surface, not the cut opening. Then, using the Mylar as a palette, take the stencil brush and turn it in a circular motion, working the crayon into the soft bristles of the brush. Then transfer the crayon to the wall, gently at first, then increasing the pressure to achieve the desired color. The crayon dries very quickly, so after completing one section, move on to the next. Using our last mark as a guide, overlap the next stencil to it. Each time you move the stencil, check the back and clean when necessary with mineral spirits to maintain a sharp line. In the next portion of our program, we're going to be showing you how to hang different types of wall covering.
The variety of wallpapers available today runs the gamut from the conventional to exotic. Standard wallpapers, all vinyl, foil, woven and non-woven fabric.
For our project house, we're going to be hanging standard pre-pasted wallpaper here in the dining room, unpasted string cloth in the office, and unpasted all vinyl wall covering in the bathroom.
The tools needed for hanging wall covering are few. For measuring, we'll be using a tape measure, a 6-inch or 12-inch broad knife, a step ladder, a 4-foot carpenter's level, scissors for cutting the paper, a razor knife, a seam roller, a smoothing brush, a straight edge or yardstick, and water trays.
Before purchasing your wallpaper, you need to take an accurate measurement of the walls to be covered, the heights and the widths, in order to estimate how much wallpaper you'll need.
Wall coverings come by the bolt, each bolt consisting of 2 or 3 rolls. The width of the roll can vary depending on the brand, from 18 inches to 28 inches for many standard papers, and 36 inches for string and grass cloth. But the overall square footage of each roll is 36 square feet, which will cover about 30 square feet of wall surface when you account for scraps.
We're measuring the wall areas by the foot, multiplying the height by the width of each wall and adding all the figures together. That gives us the total square footage of the room. Then we divide that figure by 30 to get the number of rolls of wallpaper needed. Then we subtract 1 roll for every average-sized window and door in the room.
Accuracy is essential in estimating. One should always buy a bit more than they need to allow for damage and waste. A roll left over and stored in a safe place is good insurance in case the wallpaper should be damaged.
Here's a couple tips in preparing the wallpaper. First, back roll the wall covering and inspect it for possible defects in color and irregularities in the pattern. This also relaxes the core area, which has been wound up tightly. Then, check the lot numbers to make sure all the rolls of wallpaper have the same number.
The success of your wall covering project depends so much on the surface quality of the existing walls. Wallpaper will not hide all bumps, indentations, or surface irregularities. So for good results, make sure your walls are smooth and clean. There are several ways to strip off the old wall covering, depending on how it's affixed. The 2 most common ways are with a hot water steamer and a sprayer. The sprayer saturates the wall with a mixture of water and chemical additive.
The steamer removes old wallpaper by loosening the adhesive backing with a combination of heat and moisture, and it works real well on plaster walls. Now to work it, you just fill the tank with water, plug it in, and wait for it to heat up. Then hold the steamer up against the wallpaper until the steam has worked into the adhesive. Remove the steamer, and with a putty knife, pull the wallpaper away. The steam is very hot, so it's not a bad idea to wear protective gloves and safety glasses. And as far as the mess is concerned, be sure to protect your floors with poly that's then covered by a canvas drop cloth. For spraying off the old wall covering, we rented a spray outfit that's commonly used for lawn and garden chores. Now, the chemical we're using, when added with water, creates an enzyme that literally eats away the old paste. Now, if the wall covering has a heavy plastic or vinyl surface, it's going to be difficult removing it with either a chemical sprayer or a steamer. If that's the case, you can use a perforating tool and score the wall covering so the spray or steam can penetrate effectively. The depth of the cut can be regulated by the pressure you apply to the tool. With it thoroughly scored in diagonal cross-hatching, you can now spray and allow plenty of time for it to soak in. After a while, you'll begin to see bubbles where the paper is separating from the wall. Then, taking a broad knife, scrape it off. With the old wallpaper removed, the next step is to thoroughly prepare the surface of the walls for the new wall covering. Now that includes scrubbing off the old adhesive residue with trisodium phosphate, sanding down any rough spots, patching, priming, and then applying a thorough coat of sizing. A tip when washing walls is to wash from the bottom of the wall and move upward. Working from the bottom up allows you to catch any dirt streaks as they run into the clean area, where they can easily be wiped up. Have 2 pails, one with TSP and one with clean water, each with its own sponge. Work a small section at a time, about 3 feet square, sponging on the solvent and following it with a clean rinse to pick up the residue. After a thorough wash and rinse, fill any cracks, dents, or wall irregularities with patching compound. After the compound is dried, sand it smooth. Now apply a coat of primer to the entire wall surface that will be papered. Sizing serves 2 important purposes. It provides a tacky wall surface, which helps position the wall covering as you work, and it also facilitates any later removal. On drywall, an alkyd undercoat is used prior to sizing to minimize the wall's absorption of the moisture in the wall covering adhesive and to allow easy removal of the wall covering without harming the drywall. The sizing should be completely dry before you hang the wallpaper. It takes about half an hour. Now, there's lots of different kinds of sizing, so it's best to check with your paint supplier to find out what's recommended for your type of wallpaper.
Soon we'll be hanging our wallpaper. We'll start by drawing a plumb line on the wall where we'll hang our first piece. Finding a starting point is done by finding the least conspicuous area where the pattern of the first piece may not match up with that of the last. So we want to locate a vertical line for our first strip. Now, your wallpaper probably won't hang straight if you just rely on your eye, or if you expect the wall to be perfectly square in the corner. So to establish a plumb line, you can use either a plumb bob or a 4-foot level. The first strip will overlap the corner by a ½ inch. So with that in mind, I start at the top and measure out from the corner the width of one strip minus 1/2 inch and make a pencil mark. Then I repeat this measurement 2 more times, out from the middle and out from the bottom. Now we'll establish our level off the pencil mark that's closest to the corner. In our case, the top line. With the bubble centered, I draw my guideline. It's always best to use a pencil for this, as ink has a tendency to bleed through the wallpaper and chalk can smear when the paper is applied. When planning your placement, look closely at the patterns you've chosen. You may want to measure and pencil out the layout of the wallpaper around the entire room to get an idea of where the cuts will be coming. This might help prevent any noticeable mismatches.
There are basically 2 different kinds of patterns. The straight match pattern, in which the lines run horizontally, and the diagonal or drop match pattern. With a straight match pattern, all the ceiling lines will be the same. With a drop match pattern, every other strip will line up at the ceiling. In looking at the pattern, we check for the distance between the repeats. Vertical pattern repeats can run from less than 1 inch up to a couple of feet. And this dimension is important to know for hanging and cutting the sheets.
For appearance's sake, we want to position the top edge so that the pattern's full motif shows at the ceiling level, as opposed to one that's been cut in half. Remembering, we'll still need about 1 inch to 1.5 inches for trimming purposes. So I can cut this piece of wallpaper 8 feet, the height of the ceiling, plus 3 inches for waste.
We've cut the first strip of wallpaper to the desired 8-foot length. Now for our pre-pasted wallpaper application, we're going to be using a water tray that will fill 3/4 full with lukewarm water. First we immerse it in the water, pattern side out, to moisten the adhesive. Then roll it right back out, keeping an eye on the back to make sure that the water has thoroughly covered the adhesive. Then fold the wallpaper over so that the edges meet approximately in the middle without overlapping, making sure to line up the edges exactly. This folding process is called booking. In handling the paper, be careful not to crease the folds. For this pre-pasted wall covering, we want it to rest for about 10 minutes before applying it to the wall. This allows the wallpaper to expand properly and helps avoid blistering and lifting of the seam.
We hang it on the wall, lifting it to the wall with the top half of the book undone. First I line up the right edge of the wallpaper with the plumb line that I drew earlier. Then I give the upper portion of the strip a couple strokes with a brush to hold it in position. You can see that I've given a few inches of overlap, which I'll later trim to the ceiling. To prevent any wrinkling or binding in the corners, I make a little diagonal snip. Now carefully, I unfold this lower half and position it to the line and smooth it out. On the first piece, a good rule of thumb when smoothing out pre-pasted wall covering is to work from the plumb line to the side of the wall. Careful not to exert so much pressure that you lose adhesive out the edge. With the strip smoothed out, I can trim the excess at the ceiling and along the baseboard. Holding the broad knife between the paper and the razor knife, I slit along the edge of the ceiling, only lifting the broad knife as I go, not the blade of the razor knife. A good tip is to have plenty of blades on hand and to change them often. A dull blade will tear and damage the paper. After it's smooth and secure, you can go back over the whole strip with a wet sponge, wiping up any paste on the paper. If not rinsed off right away, the adhesive can harden and discolor the surface and be next to impossible to remove. As you go over it, you also want to keep an eye out for air bubbles. It takes about 15 minutes for the adhesive to bite into the wall, so should there be a problem, there's time to remove the strip and reposition it.
The second strip is applied just like the first, only now we have a pass-through to the kitchen to paper around. This application will be treated the same as for any door or window. With the strip cut, booked, and rested, we apply it to the wall, covering the pass-through as though it wasn't there, sliding it over, butting the edges together snugly without overlapping, then taking care to align the pattern. Now we can smooth the paper to the pass-through's casing and using scissors make a diagonal cut for the corners. Then we can re-smooth and trim the excess using the broad knife and razor. And then we follow the same procedure for the other side. We've waited about 15 minutes to go over the seam gently with a roller. The reason for the delay is to give the adhesive enough time to bond so that we're not forcing any out between the seams.
Our next strip is at the corner. Now, it's never a good idea to completely wrap an inside corner with the full width strip of wall covering. Rarely are corners plumb, and not only are you apt to get a mismatched pattern, the paper will pull away from the corner, leaving wrinkles.
We recommend that you measure from the corner to the nearest strip at the top, the middle, and the bottom, and taking the widest dimension, add 1/8 of an inch. Then while it's setting, mark and cut the strip to this measurement, and then apply it to the corner. Now establish a vertical plumb line on the adjacent wall, the width of the partial strip. Then line it up along the plumb line, smooth, and rinse.
It's never a good idea to pre-cut holes in the wall covering to fit around switches, outlets, or other obstacles. It's much easier to just paper over them. Then with your razor knife, carefully slit an X just inside each corner and cut off the extra paper, leaving a little margin for air that the plate will later cover. Of course, when working around electrical wiring, you want to be extremely cautious with a razor knife. So a good safety measure is to first turn off the power.
Our next obstacle in the room is an oversized window that will require a couple short strips in the middle.
Okay. That's in about the right spot there.
With patterned wallpaper on a window this size, there's always the possibility of a mismatch with the last bottom strip. A way to minimize the mismatch is to delay trimming the excess off the bottom of the lower strips until they're all in place. Then, with the window trimmed out, you can adjust the bottom strips up and down to match the strip on the right side of the window. Well, we've come full circle, and now we're ready to put up the last strip in the dining room. So we measured to the corner and cut a strip to the widest dimension. Now, ideally, it will cut right at the corner, but more often than not, it will wrap somewhat, overlapping the first strip.
Okay.
wall covering project is to hang an unpasted string cloth around this room. Now, in preparation for hanging the string cloth, we primed the walls with an oil-based primer and then added a coat of sizing.
With our plumb line drawn on our first piece in position, we're ready to hang the second piece.
String cloth generally comes wider than standard wallpaper. And since we're applying the paste to the wall, we won't be booking or resting this strip. Application of string cloth is very much like that of other wall coverings, only care must be taken that the paste doesn't get on the surface. Should the adhesive get on the string cloth, clean it off immediately, lightly sponging in the direction of the weave. All smoothing is done with a brush, including the seams, working from the middle outward in the direction of the fiber. In trimming at the ceiling and the panel cap, again use a sharp razor knife and a broad knife, making the cut on the outside of the broad knife to protect the cloth from accidentally striking it with the blade. The rest of the application is much the same as a pre-pasted paper, except at the corners there's no overlap. The cloth is cut flush to the corner.
Our next wallpapering project involves this recessed window with its sheetrock wrap returns. We'll treat it as we have all the other windows and doors. First we align our pattern and work up, cutting for the cabinet, then smoothing it into place. Then cutting away the excess at the top, side, and leaving the bottom for later. Now we can make horizontal cuts at the bottom and top using the edge of the sheetrock return as a guide. Then wrap the paper around the return, smooth, and trim the excess. We then measured the width, added a ½ inch, and cut the strip of paper for the sill. After it rested, we laid it into place matching the pattern, folding the front over the lip, then replacing the first piece to hide the edge. The same process is followed at the top and the other side.
The last wallpapering application we want to show you is how to make your own border. We'll be hanging ours midway along the soffit. Now, making your own border involves cutting a strip from either the wallpaper that you're using on the wall or from a complementary pattern. We'll be using our kitchen wallpaper. Before cutting the border strips, I measured the dimensions of the soffits and marked a guideline for the placement of the border. Then I transferred those measurements to the wallpaper so that each strip would run the length of a soffit with a couple inches for overlap. Then I cut the wallpaper the desired width of the strip. A geometric pattern like this one makes it easy to frame and cut. With the strip booked, I apply it to the soffit at the corner, smoothing it out as I go with my hands. Because of the length of these strips, I've folded them up like an accordion to make them easier to handle. Now, with one full strip hand smoothed and aligned to the pencil marks, I can smooth it down with a brush and sponge it clean.
That pretty well wraps up the show. We hope this video presentation will make your next painting and wallpapering project a little more enjoyable. As with most things, there are variables with every project. Problems particular to your house we weren't able to cover in this video presentation.
For more information on the subject of interior painting and wall covering, check the bibliography in the back of your companion project guide. And if you're planning on doing any more home projects yourself, check out our other titles. I'm Peggy Knapp.
And I'm Dean Johnson. So long.
Hometime is made possible by Chevrolet, who brings you full-size Chevy pickups, the most advanced in Chevy history. Chevy S10 pickups, compact, fun, and hard-working. Chevy S10 Blazer, America's most popular sport utility vehicle. Chevy Astro, the van that can. The heartbeat of America. Today's Chevy truck.